Welcome to This Jungian Life. Three good friends and Jungian analysts, Lisa Marciano, Deborah Stewart, and Joseph Lee, invite you to join them for an intimate and honest conversation that brings a psychological perspective to important issues of the day.
I'm Lisa Marciano, and I'm a Jungian analyst in Philadelphia.
I'm Joseph Lee, and I'm a Jungian analyst in Virginia Beach, Virginia.
I'm Deborah Stewart, a Jungian analyst on Cape Cod. Today, we are going to talk about memory, and we are delighted and honored to have Viviane Silvera with us as a guest. She has made an incredible film called See Memory, in which you get to see her animation and memories being mutable, malleable, growing and changing, in combination with a series of leading neuroscientists from all kinds of leading organizations who talk about the neuroscience of memory. So the film and Viviane's work, the narration, really sets up all kinds of bridges. There's a bridge between art and science, the past and the present, what is fact and what is meaning, what is what we remember and how is it fueled by imagination. And all of it is a guided tour to healing. Viviane has done all kinds of work of note and been part of Basel, Miami, and the Berlin Art Week and Imagine Science Film Festival, and much, much more. With all that said, let's launch into exactly what is memory. We think we know what it is.
Can I bring in one more thing? Because I think this is really relevant. Is Viviane, your film is going to be shown on PBS. Is that correct? Can you just give us that date and tell us a little bit about that, and then we can go into the content?
Yes. So See Memory will launch on the PBS streaming apps, PBS Passport, pbs.org, starting this April 28th. And then it will have its broadcast premiere in New York on May 19th, Channel 13, May 22nd, Los Angeles, all over the country throughout May, essentially. And we'll link to that, to those broadcast dates.
And you will want to see this film. And so all those dates and places will be in the show notes so that you can take a look and see the film.
So Viviane, if you would start us off, for listeners who may not be yet familiar with this film, tell us a little bit about the story of the film. What prompted you to make it? What is the meta-communication from it?
Well, what prompted me to make See Memory was that, you'll watch a little bit about my background in the film. I had been investigating my own memory. I was born and raised in Hong Kong and Brazil before coming to New York, and had a sort of strange relationship with my own memory that I don't think I really began to try and clarify or relay to someone else till I had my first child. And I had read in a parenting book that it was really important to give your child a sense of where you come from because it makes them feel grounded, and to share stories with them. And I saw my husband, who's from Chicago and who, can still go back to the house he was born in and that he grew up in, have so many vivid memories, and that eventually both my children loved hearing those stories. And I had a really hard time accessing my own childhood memories in Hong Kong. And they would ask me lots of questions, and I could feel them. They almost felt like looking at a foggy dream, but I really had a hard time conveying explicit stories. So I would have it was very impressionistic. And then when I looked at my memories when I moved at the age of 10 to Brazil, they sort of snap into focus and into color. And I became really driven to try and understand, why there were different qualities to my memories, why I had access to some and not to others. And, I was very, very honestly, very frustrated with myself and with that access to memory. I had been looking at memory as a painter before I made the film, and actually did a series called Borrowed Memory, where I borrowed other people's childhood photographs from their childhoods in Hong Kong in the 70s and 80s, and used some of my own and used white to sort of symbolize the color of memory. So just drew these essentially white images on colored papers so that they would feel almost ghostly. And it was an experiment to see if by creating all these images, if I borrowed other people's memories, if I rendered them, could I absorb them as my own? And I have to report that I felt quite satisfied afterwards, like I had filled up an empty image bank.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
And so I knew when I started that project that I would spend the rest of my life as an artist exploring memory, because it's so mysterious and it's endless, and it is the fabric of our identity, and that there would only be more and more and more questions. So I actually felt so excited that I found the thing that I could explore for the rest of my life.
On Saturday, May 17th, join me and Deb for a Shadow and Dreams seminar, a sneak preview of how we work with shadow and dreams in this Jungian Life Dream School. Every night, our dreams confront us with shadow, what the waking mind doesn't want to know. Our dreams bring shadow close in order to compensate, complement, or contradict the conscious attitude. During the 1-hour session, we'll dive deeper into Carl Jung's concept of the shadow and see how it fits in with dream work. We'll also conduct a live dream interpretation using a dream submitted by an attendee. There'll be time to ask your questions about Jungian dream analysis, and we'll reveal a special TJL Dream School offering for spring 2025, exclusive to seminar attendees. There will be a recording available if you book a space and then can't make it. So, if you're curious about shadow and dreams or would like to know more about our dream school, we hope to see you at 12 p.m. Eastern Time on Saturday, May 17th. Follow the link in the show notes to book your free space. And I love the way, the film starts that memory is one of our most magical abilities or something like that. And it's so true. You say in the film that without memory, we don't have any form, we don't have an identity, we don't have a stable sense of self. Without memory, there is no meaning. So I was really intrigued by this relationship between memory and meaning. Of course, we make meaning from our memories. And, as you discuss, we kind of tell ourselves different stories. But I'm also thinking about the way that memory is the tissue of meaning. And some of those memories, when you were talking just now about Hong Kong, I was thinking about how maybe our relationship to early childhood memories are different in the age of the photograph. That, 200 years ago, when people had no photographs of their childhood, they may have stories, but there is something to be able to look at a picture and then you think there's so many things that you don't know if you remember your third birthday or if you just remember seeing that picture of it for so long that it's kind of become a memory.
Yeah.
So something about the way that our memories give us a chance to make meaning of who we are and where we've been.
Yeah.
Yeah, those opening lines are actually from Eric Kandel, the brilliant neuroscientist who won the Nobel Prize for his research on memory. And I couldn't think of a more beautiful way to open the film with why memory, why explore memory. And he just captured the fact that it's magical, which I definitely feel, but also without memory, and I love his words, the glue that binds our mental life together. And that, yes, without memory, life wouldn't have any meaning. And I think when you see films like that film Still Alice, the one with Julianne Moore, where you see she plays this professor who's gradually losing her memory, you feel it on a very visceral level.
Yeah.
Just how lost you just can't get from point A to point B without your memory. So interestingly, I recently had a conversation with Dr. Charan Ranganeth, who wrote a book that's out now called Why We Remember, and he's a neuroscientist at UC Davis. And he pointed out that we talked about Daniel Kahneman's work. Daniel Kahneman, who is a psychologist who won a Nobel Prize for his work on behavioral economics, but he talked about the remembering self and the experiencing self. And Dr. Ranganeth had studied with him, and Kahneman's, whole idea that we're mostly living in service to our remembering self. So, the idea that is the experience in the moment more important, or the memories you take away, which, you'll have for the rest of your life. And sort of when he asked people when planning a vacation, what's more important, the actual 1 week you're on vacation or the memories you'll form and you'll have? And everyone says it's for their remembering self. And it's interesting because when you then think about people who have memory loss, who are interacting, let's say, with a loved one who does not have memory loss, one of them is completely in the experiencing self, right? And one of them is still in service to the remembering self. And he pointed this out, which I thought was so insightful, is that if we're the people interacting with someone we love who can no longer remember us or our name, or we're having an experience with them that they won't then remember, but we will, we're giving the experience meaning. But they're not. They're in the moment. And maybe they're not suffering the way we are because they're not trying to give it meaning. They're in the experiencing self. So I just thought that was a really great insight, as we think about the importance of memory. And I have actually seen, my husband's great grandmother who lived till 99, the last few years, she actually had no short-term memory. And we'd go visit her and we'd say, what'd you have for breakfast? And she'd be like, I don't know. But she was so happy-go-lucky. And I think she had always, the world treated her well. She trusted people. So when we walked in to visit her, she wasn't quite sure who we were, but she felt we came in love. And she sort of, even though she couldn't remember, her whole disposition, it's sort of what Daniela Schiller talks about in my film, See Memory. Your whole behavior is your memory. So while she might not have semantic memory or memory, her behavior is showing, or it indicated to me, that she had been treated kindly and hadn't been, had no reason to mistrust the world. And so when she had her dementia and memory loss, her behavior reflected that still. And so she was still quite a joyful person.
This reminds me of something that Jung also thought of as a primary goal of analysis, which was the emergence of the new attitude. And what he meant by that is that we are functioning along these kinds of unconscious axioms, maybe not even an awful lot of them, but either we've integrated something that works against us or something has come into us that is no longer serviceable. And the arc of the analysis is the death and transformation of the attitude to the better one. And that's kind of like the mainframe program in the bottom of the personality. And often the attitudes are, when this emerges in an analysis, is just 1, 2, 3 words. And it sounds like this is a great example that when all of the adornments leave us, then it is the fundamental attitude that guides our orientation and, most importantly, our expectations of the world. And that's such a beautiful example of that.
Yeah. It's the meaning-making function that we have, and it's such a fundamental part of being human. It's kind of a double-edged sword, because just as Joseph was saying, it does fuel our expectations of every time I have done this, it didn't work out well and I felt bad afterwards. So now I'm going to do it again. And I expect that something similar will occur, unlike the grandmother that you visited in Chicago, who had that fundamental implicit body-oriented expectation that people mean well and it will be good.
I just want to say my mother died from vascular dementia, and I watched that happen pretty intimately over the course of more than a decade, and it wasn't joyful. I think there was a period in which she knew. This is my assumption. I think there was a period in which she knew because she seemed like defensive about it, and she didn't want to have the experience of sort of being of having it revealed that she couldn't remember things, and then there was this period where, and I think this is kind of like what you were saying, Vivian, where she there were things she couldn't remember, like she may not remember my name, but she knew she loved me, that kind of thing, that just the feeling was there. But it was a tragic process. And I do think, and I've had that thought too, because I'm, of course I'm like, when is it going to be my turn? I've thought a lot about it with good reason, right? Because what percentage of the population experiences some degree of memory loss? It's significant. And we've all probably had loved ones that we've cared for, or many of us have, or many of us will. But it has occurred to me that there was this maybe period of time where she knew it was happening. And then I think she didn't really know.
Yeah.
And that there was probably a time where that was just kind of a blessing. But, also the causes of memory loss are so variable. And there was something about her dementia where there was a diminishment, there was a flattening too, So it wasn't just that she was not remembering. There wasn't that ability to just kind of be in the moment and experience joy either. So there are other things that were being lost as well.
So memory is a sort of pervasive and somewhat elusive function. It links past, present, future of what we think and make meaning of, and our emotions. Including what is it that we choose to remember. I have a sister who's very close to me in age, and at times you would think we had been raised in two entirely different households, because the things that I really remember that struck me with enough emotional force that I remembered them, like this is important, are very different from the things that resonated with her. So in a way, it's almost as if it is the basis for our humanity. It's the glue.
It is. What's interesting about that is since doing all this research and making the film, I've realized, though, that we have more agency than we realize. So one of the people I interviewed who was really foundational for the film is Dr. Silvana Reggio, who's both a neurologist and a psychiatrist. And so to her, I said, okay, take me to the very beginning. And one of the things she said that still echoes in my head is, before memory is attention. You only remember what you pay attention to. There will no be short-term memory, long-term memory without that. So, the example she gave was, you get into an elevator, you have your mind on something, you forget to press a button, and you think, oh my God, I'm losing my memory. You're not losing your memory. You just weren't paying attention. I mean, I think we can talk about what that means now in this whole new social media world where people's attentions, the way we pay attention is changing. I think that's going to have, just as an artist who's interviewing neuroscientists, I can get a sense of the long-term impact of that. But so I intervene in my own memory formation now that I've made the film. So what I mean by that is, let's say I'm in a difficult situation or a painful situation. I also know that memory simply is an association between two or more things. So memory is learning. You're in an experience, you associate, let's say, I'm looking at you and I associate, well, you and Joseph are wearing the same color shirt. I'll make some kind of association between that and I'll link that to something else, right? And so we can actually have, if you become conscious of that memory is what you pay attention to and associate, you can then choose what to bring in, what to pay attention to on the most basic level. Sometimes when I'm taking a walk in Central Park in the morning with my dog and I'm in a bad mood and I'm really stressed, I'll say, okay, dial in on sounds. And then I'll hear birds sing. I'll hear things in the middle of New York City. Yes, you will still hear these things. And I've become aware of my brain as almost like a camera with a lens, and I can choose what to zoom into and what to make fuzzy and zoom out of. And I use this also with my children. Let's say they come home and they're very upset, or maybe they feel a victim of a situation. You can, in the moment, say, was anyone kind to you? You can start to bring in an association so that it's not a purely negative one. And so I think for me, what I've learned about memory is that we have an ongoing relationship with our memories, and that both we can intervene in a memory being formed in the present, but you can also intervene in memories that were already formed, and you can highlight things that maybe you didn't put a lot of attention on, but you can make a choice. And, Daniela Schiller, one of the neuroscientists in the film, is the one that really highlighted that to me. She's very interested in our relationship to memory. And whenever I would go interview, a new neuroscientist, I would say, what do you think I should ask them? And she said, ask them, what is their relationship to their memory? But, for her, it's this living, breathing, active thing. And I do think it is very optimistic, because I did feel a victim to my memory. I only have access to what it wants to give me. I don't have access, I just I'm either run over it or it's out of reach, or, I just have to take what it gives me. And if it's a negative memory, it will stay negative. And, I don't mean to dilute that. Painful memories are still very painful. But one of the most painful things, I think you all know, as therapists, is feeling helpless. And when you start to realize you do have some agency, it can be really quite transformative.
Yeah. I'm thinking along the lines of Gestalt therapy, which talks about things that are figural, that they're in the forefront, and things that are in the ground, in the background. And I'm also wanting to lift up that it's not, I think you're not talking only about a cognitive process, but about the ability to play with your own memories and mental processes and meaning making, that you can move some of the pieces around on the set and feel into them. Just as you said, you might ask one of your children, was in that distressing situation, was anybody looking at you compassionately? And then just try moving that one up to the foreground and making it figural. That my friend so-and-so was looking at me very sympathetically.
Exactly. Yes.
So that we just practice entering that scene. And that's what's so vivid and wonderful in your film, is there's scene after scene after scene, and how it keeps changing. And just enter it and move things around a little bit and see what happens. It's not forcing a change or, this time I'm going to think about it differently. It's just going into it and having access. And as you said, agency. It's hugely optimistic and it's kind of fun. And nothing like playing with yourself. Pardon the usual connotation.
I want to just bring us briefly to this discussion about the malleability of memory. And I know that the film title was kind of inspired by this essay by Oliver Sacks that I recently read, which is pretty well known, called Speak Memory. And in that essay, Sacks talks about these two different experiences of growing up in during World War II in London. And there were these two times when a bomb hit close to the house, and he had very vivid memories of both of them. And I think as an adult, he was talking about the second one, and his brother said, "You weren't there. You were at school. And we wrote you about it, or maybe you were out in the country. I can't remember, but he was away." And he received a letter about that second bomb and how they responded to it that was very vivid. It was highly emotional. And he also could picture everything because it happened in a place that he was very familiar with. But he could not reconcile himself to the fact that that wasn't actually his memory. So I think he's interested in sort of looking at, what is memory? And you say in the film, memory is not a recording device.
Yeah.
And of course, this is so infuriating when you're in an argument with your spouse, right? Sometimes don't you wish that you could just go back, rewind, and say, "No, see, you really did say." But unfortunately, it's not. So we all kind of have our own version, and it is a little bit of a fiction. I'm also thinking of the work of Elizabeth Loftus, who did that sort of famous, maybe infamous experiment about Lost in the Mall. So she took some subjects and kind of implanted a memory. Do you remember the time that you were lost in the mall as a little kid? And at first they'd be like, no. It's like, well, but then this happened, this. And eventually the person's like, yeah, I got lost in the mall as a kid. It was really upsetting. So I think the point of her research was it has implications for law enforcement, and it has implications for us too as individuals. Like some of the things that we think happened to us may not have happened to us. So and that doesn't mean that in some sense it's not a real experience. I mean, even the people that then had this experience of being lost in the mall, even though that never factually happened, it became part of their experience, right?
Yeah, I mean, that Oliver Sacks article really blew my mind when I first read it. And I read it when I had already started making the film, but it is why I decided to call it See Memory. He titled his article Speak Memory, which he was actually titling after Nabokov's book, Speak Memory.
Yes.
But, one of the things that struck me is, yes, he had actually written about that experience of experiencing the bomb. And then his brother wrote to him and said, no, and he put it in a memoir.
Yes, that's right.
And what I found so fascinating is Sacks saying that there's no way to decipher between an experienced memory and neurologically, there's no way to decipher between an experienced memory and an imagined memory. It looks the same in the brain. And that really just blew my mind. And this also came up in my interview with Dr. Silvana Riggio, who I mentioned before, where she was talking to me about the power of the mind. And she said, okay, close your eyes. Imagine slicing open a lemon and biting into the lemon. And I did. And she said, can you taste it? And I said, I absolutely can.
Yeah.
And she said, there you go. That's how powerful the mind is. And so, at first I came at it with saying the things you just said, Lisa. I went to Daniela Schindler. I was like, this is terrible. There's no way to decipher between an experience. What does this mean for our courts, for police, for all of these things, but also for ourselves? What does it mean if our memories are the story we tell of how we became who we are? And we may have we might not have even experienced those things.
Right.
And she had the more optimistic view, which is fine.
Right.
Let's have a more relaxed relationship with our memory. Let's not be, so strident. Let's very much be here now in a way, listen to who you are now. Those words in the film, she said, in a way, it can be liberating, right? Because then you're left with listening to who you are now. And, one of the reasons that was so fascinating to me is because, and it was also one of the motivations for making the film after I had already done a few bodies of work in painting and drawing about memory, was my daughter at the time was 3 years old. And she noticed I have a bump on my collarbone. And I remember very vividly, we were in the kitchen and she said, "Mommy, why do you have a bump on your collarbone?" And I told her the story, and I told it as a story of how, I went to Greece when I was 19 years old and I rented a moped, and I, was on the moped and I was on this very bumpy road and I was following my friends. And instead of doing what you're supposed to do, when the moped started to wobble, I sped up. Like I just unconsciously, I sped up, fell down, broke my collarbone, and I described in detail getting picked up by this truck and bumping along the road, and I could feel the bone moving.
God.
Anyway, so she started crying. She said, "Mommy," she burst into tears and she was very angry. And she said, "I wish you hadn't told me. Now I feel like I broke my collarbone."
Oh.
And I was dumbstruck, dumbfounded, because I had that experience many times where I would go to a movie and let's say the movie would be about a boxer. I would walk out of the movie and literally these thoughts would float through my head. I feel really beat up. And then I'd have to say, "Vivian, you are not a boxer. This didn't happen to you." And I thought, why am I like this? Why do I absorb this?
It's mirror neurons.
Right. So I thought maybe it's me. Maybe it's that I grew up in Hong Kong. Maybe it's my relationship to memory. Maybe it's all part of this puzzle. And then when she did it, having had none of those experiences, having a very ordinary childhood in a place where everyone speaks English, none of the things that I thought maybe confused me. And she did the very same thing. I said, okay, I've got to get into this. I've got to figure this out. So that was one of the big motivations when she said, "I feel like that happened to me." And she was able to verbalize it.
Wow.
She didn't absorb it the way Sachs did. And then it came out years later. In the moment, she said, "Now I feel like it's my memory."
That's brilliant.
But it just opens up so much, what we might talk about as psyche. And that we're open to all kinds of experiences like, vicariously, like your daughter did. She knew what it was like to have a broken collarbone. And of course, we're always talking about dreams. And we experience things in dreams. We're wide open to all kinds of experiences. We read books and we go to movies and we interact with people, and then we construct meaning from that. And we think it's sort of fact and it's concrete and it's objective, but most of the time it's really not.
Yeah. It's the whole reason why I think I felt like I found the thing I can explore forever with memory, because it mingles with almost every part of it. First of all, when you're learning, when you're in school, well, even when you're a young child before you go to school and you're learning, that's memory, right? Learning is memory. And, there's almost intellectually, it's a huge part of it is our life. Emotionally, it is our life, and so it just seems like when I say memory, what I imagine? The picture that comes is the ocean. Because it feels like this powerful thing that, I feel the same way about the ocean, that we're so small and the ocean is so powerful. And it's like a giant tidal wave that you just get swept up in. And I sort of see memory as vast and endless and powerful as the ocean, with a lot of wonderful qualities, but then also a lot of dark qualities. And when the film very much goes into traumatic memory, but when you suffer from a traumatic memory, it can really take over your life. And to me, that's the dark nature of what is memory. And, it can be magical. You can have nostalgia. You can, I know for my children, there's nothing they like more than hearing about stories of when they were little. And I think we all see that. We all love that, right? So memory can be so entertaining. It's sort of like sitting by the campfire telling stories. A lot of that is just memories, right? But then when you don't know what it is, when it's unconscious and traumatic, and it runs your life without you being able to intervene with it, which is what happens when people have traumatic memories, then it's powerful in a very dark and I think dangerous way.
You know, I want to dip into some more of what you say in the film about traumatic memories, but before we go there, just you know, you were talking about this kind of very optimistic view, you know, that we can intervene, that we don't have to be kind of anchored to a negative memory, say. And that does bring up something that Jung talked about, or at least it feels related. So Jung had this idea that you could either look at the psyche reductively or prospectively. And Freud's view of looking at the psyche was very reductive, so that you come in with a problem to therapy and immediately the assumption is the problem's in the past and we have to find that memory, and then you become like a detective to search for the memory that created the problem. And it's not that Jung didn't think that that was worthwhile. He just didn't think it was the only thing. He was also interested in where the psyche was going. So a symptom, I don't know, let's say you're depressed. A reductive approach would have you looking for a kind of causal factor in the past, a memory, or maybe something that you could have a memory of. A prospective function would say, what is the purpose of you becoming depressed now? What is the psyche trying to accomplish? And he was interested in both of those things. And he says at some point, you know, if we only focus on a reductive approach to problems, you know, sometimes there isn't one, or there isn't one that we can remember. And then you could actually send a patient on a kind of wild goose chase, just spending all of his time ferreting through his past, trying to find the cause of it.
Yeah.
And there might not be one, or it might not be helpful to remember it. So I think that the way you've described it about being able to kind of intervene with memories and be playful with memories and recognize that they're kind of loosened up, you know, in some ways it goes against the grain of what I think is often has become a kind of like pop psychology way of understanding difficulties, which is, there must be something in the past and I've got to go find it. But I think that, of course, it's worth looking at the past, and that is a lot of what I do when I'm sitting with somebody. But we can also really cut off possibilities if that's the only thing, right?
I couldn't agree with you more. And in fact, this came up in my interview with Daniela Schiller, where, you know, sometimes when you're looking for that thing in the past, you might give the thing more importance than it actually had because you're trying to solve the puzzle.
Right.
And I remember her saying to me, look, your brain will naturally try and do that. It will try and find a reason why you feel lousy. So she's like, if you're feeling depressed and it's the end of the day and you're tired, don't try and figure out why you're depressed. She said, go to sleep.
Yeah.
Just go to sleep. You might wake up and you might just feel rested, and your brain is not going to it's not going to find the same answers that it would have the night before. And I think about that all the time because I'm always constantly, naturally trying to find meaning. Why do I feel like this? Why do I feel like that? And sometimes, and it's been a real gift to me to say, don't answer that. The feeling might go away. Let it come and go. You don't need a reason.
The stories that we come up with can be limiting.
Yes.
Yes. And causality is tricky. And we do this all the time because we want things to make sense. You know, that the reason, I'm going to make this up here, the reason that I have short hair is that when I was little, my mother really wanted me to have long hair. And I hated having to sit still while she combed it and braided it and fussed with it. And I hated that. So once I got old enough, I made sure my hair stayed short. But in therapy, we might examine that for, you know, how did that get constructed? What is its symbolic value? What might it have to do with feeling? How one felt when one was small and at the mercy in many, many ways of people who were big, called adults, rather than taking it as a concrete fact. So we're exploring things symbolically, metaphorically, and emotionally rather than just as events, frozen, concrete events, because those aren't really changeable, but how we relate to them is very changeable.
And that to me is a very important distinction, Vivian, that you do bring up indirectly throughout your entire film, is that we can search for the cause of something, and that may be fruitless, but the work is really searching for the meaning and expanding the internal images to make them metaphors. And that's the work of the artist, taking images and allowing them to mean more than simply our solitary experience. I found it interesting that your movie uses this image of snow very much in the beginning, but on and off, because snow is such a marvelous carpet of forgetting. I used to love it when I'd wake up in the morning and it would have snowed. Of course, that meant there was no school, so that made it kind of euphoric, a snow day. But also the kind of beauty of hiding everything under this glittering coolness, and that dance between loving forgetting in one regard and also the cost of forgetting, because everything is still there. It's just under the beautiful snow.
I love that. Yeah, I definitely. I mean, the film goes from winter to snow to spring. So the young woman is walking through Central Park and it's blanketed in snow, and then she walks back out into it. And at first, I thought, oh, that's so cliche. But my mind did it. Like, I didn't consciously say I'm doing winter.
Cliches are cliches for a reason.
Right, exactly. It just works. And I do think that you're absolutely right. There's something wonderful about forgetting. And then there's something painful about forgetting.
Absolutely. There's a cost because everything is still alive under the snow.
Exactly. And because you haven't completely forgotten. It's sort of, it's poking up. And maybe you need a break from it. So maybe it's good to forget, to take breaks from remembering. So, I'm very fascinated by the idea that our subconscious or our unconscious is so much wiser than our conscious. And I certainly found that when I was making the film, that the more times I could let my unconscious take charge, the better those pieces of the film were.
Yeah.
Than when my conscious was just making decisions, but they were limited. They weren't super imaginative. They were limited to what I could consciously think of. But within that unconscious, it's sort of like the whole idea of memory as something beautiful, but also something potentially dark. I think the unconscious is that, right? The unconscious is beautiful, but it can feel quite dangerous.
It can feel dangerous. And this goes to, that experience of nightmares, where the unconscious is presenting either literal or symbolic information that the ego may believe is overwhelming or frightening to its perception of itself. And yet, central to Jungian work at least, is that when the unconscious decides what missing information must be returned to the personality, although it's frightening, it is painful medicine that's necessary. Yeah. Which is different than the ego or even someone's therapist saying, oh, we've decided you need to revisit and remember this, which may not be as wise as the dream.
I like to think when you do get those pieces that are painful, that your mind knows it gives you the little bits that you can digest, the little bite-sized pieces that you can digest. And, our minds, just learning about our minds and MRIs, and instead of it being less mysterious to me, it's only more mysterious.
It doesn't give us mastery over who we are just to know what parts of the brain are lighting up.
Right.
But it is somehow gratifying, which brings us back to this idea of causality making us feel it like we somehow have power over a thing.
So let's show a little clip from the film. And Viviane, I'm wondering if you can set this clip up for us. This is Daniela Schiller talking about a really important discovery. So maybe just tell us a little bit about it, and we'll go to the clip.
So this came in the second part of the film where I invited the scientists into my studio to talk about working together and to ask them if, since we had made the film together, anything exciting or new had come up. And little did I know that she had just recently completed and published this study that shows that traumatic memories actually live in a different part of the brain than what she calls regular sad memories. And so, it's pretty widespread knowledge that long-term memories, are processed in the hippocampus, and that's where they live. And so what she did in this study, and a lot of her work that we can go into perhaps later about memory reconsolidation, was the basis for the film.
So one of the most exciting things that happened in research, from my perspective, is a discovery that we had just recently, that traumatic memories and regular sad memories are actually represented differently in the brain. We didn't know if traumatic memories are just an exaggeration of a regular memory or a different beast altogether. So we invited the people who has PTSD, and they told the clinician about a traumatic memory and a regular sort of standard sad memory. We created a recording of that, and we played it to the PTSD patients in the fMRI scanner. And we found that actually traumatic memories differ substantially in how the brain is representing them. The state of the brain, while they listen to the sad memories, was engaging a brain region that is called the hippocampus. And this is a brain region that is critical for memory. Without it, you cannot form new memories. So it's involved in the consolidation and retrieval of the memories. But in the traumatic memories, the brain was in a different state. If you look at the brain, it doesn't look like it's in a state of memory. Where we found it was in a different place. That place is called posterior cingulate cortex. It's part of a network that is not for memory per se. It's actually for internal experience. Whenever you have some sort of introspection, you think about things, you're daydreaming. It is more that you're in the present moment. When we undergo a traumatic memory, it is likely that it's encoded in a way that will influence how it is being retrieved later, whether it's coherent, whether it's accessible, whether it's resistant to change. All of these are likely to be determined during the experience itself. It's very intense. Sometimes it's hard to verbalize it. Sometimes you're dissociated from it. So all of these conditions lend to the case that the memory wouldn't be the same as a regular memory. And the fMRI scanner, it could maybe provide a sort of like a marker that you look at the brain activation before treatment and then afterward to see if that representation has changed. Or you can envision treatment with specific drugs. Maybe this is what psychedelics do. They kind of put the brain in a certain plasticity level that could help making that experience in the moment into a memory.
So what's so interesting about this, and maybe this particular dialogue that she said in the interview didn't make it into the film, but she says traumatic memories are actually not even memories yet. We call them memories, but they're not memories. And so the goal of therapy is to actually turn them into memories. Because what she showed in this study is that they live in the posterior cingulate cortex, which is not a part of the brain that really you think of as having anything to do with memory. It's where you have present day experiences. Yeah. And what was so validating about that is when you talk to people who have PTSD, one of the things that's most confusing is that the past interrupts the present. And so people will say it feels like it's happening right now.
In the DSM, those are called re-experiencing symptoms. That's what they're called.
But what she showed is it's experiencing. It's never been processed as a memory. So it's not a memory that's being recalled. It's stuck for however many years. And so now, you know, what she talked about with me is that this is something that therapists have known intuitively for a long time. And in a way, what the neuroscience is doing is it's kind of corroborating what a lot of therapists have already been putting into practice. That this idea that traumatic memories need to be stored as regular sad memories.
Which is why talking about them helps, because that's kind of what you're doing.
Yes. And then sometimes when it doesn't help, it's because the person is having this physiological response, right? Every time they're having the traumatic memory, they go into fight or flight mode. So maybe their heart rate increases or they freeze. And so one of the goals of different kinds of therapy, and I know there are many different ways of approaching this, is to allow the patient or the client to witness the memory without having that physiological response. And it's only in them being able to witness it without the response that the memory can get stored as a regular memory. And in the film, they postulate, you know, different therapists and neuroscientists suggest, well, maybe this is what psychedelics can do, in that I know some therapists I've spoken to say it's the first time for many people when they, let's say, have MDMA-assisted psychotherapy, that they're able to witness the memory without the pain and the fear and the panic associated with that memory. But perhaps you can, you know, you as therapists can speak to, I know there are many different approaches for trying to have the experience of the memory without the traumatic physiological response, which is what's keeping that memory stuck.
Yes, that's quite exactly how I explain EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And one of the tools that they've created or realized is that if we introduce bilateral stimulus as somebody is revisiting these reawakened physical states, it activates that self-soothing part of the brain, just as you said, so that people can actually talk about, recall the images of what was a traumatic memory, and suppress the hyperarousal so that the brain can learn, oh, I can think about that car crash and feel relaxed. And once the brain figures out that's an option, often it jumps at it because it's very costly to be in a state of distress without any actual clear and present danger. So that is one of the tools that I love using with clients if they're amenable to that. And I agree with you. And how I often describe it is we want to take that traumatic memory and return it to the library, much like a book that you can choose to take out or leave in the stacks.
Yes. And Dr. Paul Brody says it perfectly in the film, exactly what you said. The brain hasn't laid down that experience yet as being in the past. So a sad memory, you know it's in the past, it's over. But tools like EMDR are incredible. I wish we had had more time in the film to explore all of these different modalities, but I know that that's a very, very effective one for teaching the brain, exactly as you said, that it's happened already, you can put it away. It's not a threat anymore.
In Jungian work, we often are interested in archetypes and mythology. And so what I'd like to do is turn our attention for just a moment to the goddess of memory, Mnemosyne, who she was a Titan. So she was there before the Olympians, and she and Zeus lay together, and the two of them birth all of the muses. So one interesting piece of that is that all of the arts, all of the arts that we enjoy, that we celebrate, are products of memory.
Yes.
So in the Orphic rites, which was a particular cult in the ancient world that was very powerful, that the initiate was instructed, do not drink from Lethe. Instead, drink from the pool of Mnemosyne. And what that meant is that when the soul sojourns down into the unconscious, we could drink from the waters of forgetfulness, but if we can remember to drink from the waters of mnemosyne, that we will remember the eternal truths that are encoded in our memories. And that is another way of saying what Jung was talking about, is that if we can find the archetypal components of our memory, that we can then reimagine contexts and possibilities which were not visible in the lived experience, but are encoded somewhere inside of our soul. So, for instance, if we had a very limited mother or a very dangerous mother, if we can encounter the archetype of the mother, we can come into experience of dimensions of the mother that we did not personally experience, but enhances the possibilities of those impulses inside of us, and many examples of that. And I think that your film and your work with art and what the neuroscientists are saying corroborates that ancient intuition that if we can find the thread that is beyond the memory, we can make it more than the lived experience, and that liberates us. And that is a kind of art, much like one of the muses coming in and writing the play.
Viviane, you did that in the film. You were working with all these people that you interviewed in neuroscience and other areas. And of course, you did something like 30,000 images and paintings for the animation, which is just a staggering number. What was it like for you to do just exactly what Joseph is talking about, of just going right back in there, going into it, and re-experiencing, or experiencing perhaps for the first time?
Well, that's a good question. So one of the things I love about film, and why I decided to branch out from sculpture and painting and go into film, is that film is the most similar thing we have to dreaming. Because in dreams, we suspend disbelief, right? It's only in dreams, and Walter Murch, this legendary editor, he edited Apocalypse Now, has a wonderful book about editing that speaks to this. In dreams, we accept the jump cut. So in dreams, I can be here, and then a second later, I can be in another part of the world. And in films, we accept that as well. And it's only in those two worlds that we actually, as an audience and as a viewer of our own dreams, will accept that. So I knew that I had to go into film because it was really the only medium that could explore this kind of thing, the movement of memory, the strange surreal nature of a lot of, dream imagery. And what it was like for me was a constant. It was hard, actually, to tap into the unconscious. It would take me quite a bit of work, because I think it's much more comfortable in a way and safer to stay in the conscious mind. And of course, there's a part of me that has to be reading the transcripts of the interviews and organizing it and creating a structure. So that has to be in the conscious. But when I would try and tap into some kind of greater wisdom that I didn't have access to in my conscious mind, was in the act of painting itself. And you can paint in your conscious mind. So, and it's a little bit boring. So what would that look like? It would be sort of me having shot the film. And so then I print out an image of one of the scenes and I just start painting the image. So let's say it's the girl at the door going to meet the therapist. So I'm looking at the picture and I'm painting it and I'm rendering it, and it's keeping to the same kind of colors. I'm just trying to build the scene. And then at a certain point, I started to really listen to how I felt. And I would start to get sleepy. Or I would start to get kind of depressed. Like I would get this heavy feeling like, I don't want to do this anymore. And then I could have done what we just said we shouldn't do. Like, why am I depressed? And start to search for meaning. And instead of doing that, what I would say is change what you're doing. Okay. And so instead of painting literally, I would say allow things to come up. So what I would do is the film is made out of 30,000 stills, not 30,000 paintings. Okay. So that means that the canvas is on the wall. I'm walking up to the canvas, I'm painting 1 or 2 brushstrokes, and then I'm walking maybe 7 feet back to my camera, taking a picture and walking back. And the way I decided to approach this was actually listening to this wonderful artist, William Kentridge, who does these drawings in the similar way. And I remember him in an interview discussing the fact that in between that walk from the camera to making the next stroke, he'd have no plan. And I said, okay, I'm going to have no plan. And it was sort of, you're walking, you're like, you make a line. And it's very hard not to plan, because I'd make a line and my brain would say, it's a balloon, it's a this, like you want to name it. And I'd be like, no, just see what the next line does. And then gradually, that's where things became more interesting. And I will tell you that when people watch the film, people tell me those are their favorite parts, because it's just deeper, it's richer than anything, than just rendering something.
Yes.
But it was very hard to get into that state of mind. It really requires sort of letting go of, I guess you would call it ego, right? Trying to control, what am I going to make? What is it going to look like? What am I going to do?
The ego.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think that's how I engaged with it. And I wouldn't say it was sporadic. It's almost like a spice. Like I tap into it and then I jump out of it. And I tap into it and I jump out of it. There would be periods of maybe 2 or 3 weeks when I'd go to my studio and I sort of train my brain. So let's say that I could flip a switch. So I'd be in my conscious mind. I get to the studio, set up, I put on my headphones, I start listening to something, and my brain was cued to just, okay, that means we go into this frame of mind. And so there were amazing, beautiful periods where I could go into that frequently and often. I would say now I'm really in a period where I'm struggling to access that. So it's kind of like, not that once you do it once and you get into a groove, you have automatic access. I find
it's a practice. It's
exactly,
a discipline.
Each time I have a new project, it's the same struggle to try and access it. It's like a whole new thing each time. But I think that speaks to what you're talking about. And I think that those are the pieces that found most people find most relatable. Like it becomes sort of this common, universal themes that come out of that.
Because we know that place. Earlier we said it's film and dreams where we experience, this weird flow of you're sitting in a kitchen somewhere and then all of a sudden a horse appears. Or there's that jump cut from sitting in one location and being on the opposite side of the world. There is something in us recognizes it, recognizes it. It's familiar to us. We know about that. And what the film does with the images is it's so beautifully and recognizably demonstrates and depicts the going back and forth, dipping into the unconscious and coming back up and rendering it with a paintbrush. That there's a dialogue and a companioning between those two parts of ourselves, which is why we always do a dream at the end of every podcast. You can have this. You can find it in yourself, and it is creative and enriching and surprising, and there's a dark side to it, but it is the rest of who we are.
Yeah, beautifully put. It is the rest of who we are. Yeah.
I also think that the tone of the film captures your process. I find myself thinking that, this is a meditation.
Yeah.
It's a 26-minute meditation, and Viviane is allowing us to see this meditative process in her, your tone of voice, the gentleness of the flow from idea to idea.
Yeah, it really wraps you in a kind of mood, the film. So I hope that our viewers get to see your film, and we will include information in the show notes about where and how to do that. And I just want to say I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation.
And it's such an important conversation. I think we've put out something today through your work, Viviane, which is accessible to everybody, that will help people have more access to themselves.
I love this conversation. I love the opportunity to hear a little bit more about the Jungian lens and actually realize how much of that resonates with me, with whether I was aware of it or not.
Because it's awesome.
Yes, yeah, and so I love this opportunity to hear from you and your thoughts and just shed more light, on what is a process that I can speak about, but I'm still kind of unknown to me, even though I did it.
Yeah.
Yes, 'tis ever thus.
And I think in these times where despair is so seductive, your movie is a testament to hope.
Yeah.
And that is well timed.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Viviane.
And so, in keeping with our theme of the power of memory, let's jump into a dream. Today's dreamer is a 28-year-old female who works as a piano teacher, and she has titled her dream, A Wave of Suicides. In the beginning of the dream, my task is to make a woman kill herself by directing her steps, almost as in a video game. I make her jump off a high cliff. A wave of suicides follows everywhere I go. The people I encounter commit suicide in the same manner. It's always slow and inevitable. I know exactly when it's going to happen, and I can't escape witnessing it. The cliff they all jump off seems to be underground because it's a dark, closed space. At some point, I enter a family house to pick up my little sister, and we share a beautiful moment of love and joy. However, I know that the family that was babysitting her is now going to kill themselves, and there's nothing I can do to stop them. When the cycle ends, it starts again the same way. I wake up in the middle of it. For context, she writes, I'm realizing that I'm not fulfilled with the career I ended up with, but I still lack the drive, clarity, and courage to make steps towards changing it. Sometimes I feel like my potential was wasted, and it's almost impossible to change the situation now because of all the negative thinking and passivity deep inside me that stems from my upbringing. I am distant from my family, but often feel worried and sad about them. She says the feelings in the dream were horror, feeling trapped, scared, and hopeless, and she offers these associations. The sister from the dream is now 17 years old and identifying as a male, but in my dreams often appears as a young child with whom I had a special and loving relationship.
The first thing that I notice about this dream is the dreamer's age. She's 28, which in astrology is associated with the Saturn return. And if you don't like to think astrologically, you can think about it as what I like to think of as the age 30 transition. And it is a point, I think, it certainly was for me, as I've talked about numerous times on the podcast. It was 28 was a really important age. But I see this in people I work with. They might be 28, maybe they're 29, 30. It's around there where there's often a crisis. And I think the crisis comes because maybe it's the number 30. I'm not sure. Maybe it's something to do with the stars. But we sort of realize that we're at this point in life where we should be living our lives. And in whatever way we're not doing that, there can be deep unhappiness. Maybe we're not in a relationship, or we don't have the career that we want, but it's sort of the beginning intimation of the end of endless possibility. that we should be on our way. I mean, I think that's one way to think about it. I'm sure there's more profound ways to imagine it as well. But I think that it's actually a gift to have a crisis around this time, as this dreamer seems to be doing, because it often is what gives you a little kick in the butt to make any changes that need to be made. So sometimes when I'm working with someone who's around this age and who's really suffering and struggling, I'll say, I've seen what it looks like when you don't go through this and you come into my office and you're 55 and it's not pretty. So you should be grateful that you're kind of having this experience. So I suspect that's what this young person's going through. I think it's interesting that she says that she feels like her talent's wasted and there's nothing that can do about it. Yeah. I mean, and she talks about, so I think the suicides in the dream are kind of two things. She says, there's nothing I can do because of all the negativity and passivity and the negative thinking deep down, which is almost like that scene where they're kind of underground and they're jumping off a cliff in a dark space, right? So in some sense, the suicides are an image of her tendency to think negatively and her passivity and to just go along and kind of be self-destructive. But I also think more prospectively that the suicides could be a metaphor, a symbol for the parts of her that need to die so that she can begin to live the life that she was meant to live, whatever that is.
I think along those lines, I find myself thinking of a quote from the Gospel of Thomas. If you bring forth that which is within you, what you bring forth will save you. If you do not bring forth what is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you. So we could take this as a kind of fable almost about the danger of not bringing forth what is in you.
Yeah.
And it turns into this dark, self-destructive force that not only prompts her in the dream world to encourage injury to other people, but the energy rolling off of her has a Thanatos quality, who's the god of death, this kind of dying and death-oriented attitude. And of course, the dream maker will often exaggerate a trait to make sure that we don't miss it. So,
right.
I mean, she is this dangerously negative creature in the dream just to make sure that she doesn't skip over it.
I'm thinking a couple of things. If I could talk with this dreamer, I'd be like, wow, you're 28 years old. And the comments of that, she's not fulfilled with the career, but she lacks drive and clarity and courage to make changes. Of wow, I would think that might be more. I would accept it more if it were somebody who was 88 instead of 28 with so much of life ahead, and that's a conscious position of a kind of hopelessness. If I go to the dream, I think about a couple of things. And she says, my task at the beginning of the dream is to make a woman kill herself. So our dream ego is, in fact, quite active here.
Yeah, that's a good point.
She is the agent behind getting someone to kill herself. And that leads to a wave of suicides. Everywhere I go, people I encounter commit suicide in the same manner. It's slow and inevitable. But in fact, our dream ego has been the causal agent of that, as if she sort of got a ball rolling. And after getting the first person to commit suicide, things just sort of rolled on out from there. Then we have in the middle of this dream, as almost sort of a casual aside, I enter a family house to pick up my little sister, and we share a beautiful moment of love and joy. But something else comes in to kill that off. And our dream ego says, I know the family that was babysitting her is now going to kill themselves, and there's nothing I could do to stop them. So there is something that I would be curious about in our dreamer and in this dream about how does this happen? That at the beginning, the dream ego is the causal agent of suicides. And when, in the midst of this wave of suicides, a wonderful, loving moment of reunion happens, something else comes right in to quash that. So I think it's in the dream and in the dreamers' associations of, like, what is going on here? What is this dynamic in the dream? And it would appear from her comments and in your life.
Right, where your tendency to maybe see things negatively,
Yes.
kind of destroys potential.
Where is the life-destroying part of you?
But I want to say, to counterbalance that, there is this image of this joy and beauty with the sister.
Yes.
And of course, that would be, an image maybe of, it takes us back to the past because her sister is younger. I'd be curious about who the sister was at that time, who she was at that time, at that age. Curious about the sister as a potential shadow figure that carries a lot of positive qualities. But I also want to point out that this dreamer wrote her dream down and sent it to the podcast. So she may find herself in a bit of a tendency to be negative and passive, but
look what happened.
She's tuning in and she's taking action.
The other thing that's important is at the end, she talks to her little sister, but it's the caregivers of the sister that are going to suicide, not the sister.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So her theory in the middle of the dream that wherever I go, my mere presence causes this death-dealing despair. But towards the end, it's as if the sister is immune to the curse, so to speak.
Yeah. And I also want to just touch on the dreamer as a piano teacher. So what I'm wondering about is, what is it like when you just play the piano for your own enjoyment? Is there a part of you that loves the music and loves music making versus teaching music? And is that a doorway that you can access to more active and participatory and maybe even some transcendent kinds of lived experiences?
I want to cycle back to a bit that I brought up, but is present in a couple of ways in the dream, which is a tension that Freud brought up, particularly in his later work, between Eros and Thanatos.
Mm-hmm.
Thanatos being the anti-life libido, Eros being the pro-life libido. And those two things are explicitly present in this dream.
Yeah.
That we have all of this death dealing, and then we have love and joy, which is an exact description of Eros. So she is in this tension between creating and destroying, between life and a death in her inner world, and both characters are present. She is identifying, it seems, at the beginning of the dream with Thanatos, which also sometimes Jung would call is a negative inflation. Mm-hmm. It's as if I have this supernatural power and death happens in my trail wherever I go. And it may be an exaggeration, but also she may think of herself as more death-dealing than perhaps is warranted, but that would have to be explored. In the beginning of the dream, she has a task to misdirect a woman to injure herself. This is also about shadow, that people will unconsciously encourage people around them to do negative things, dangerous things sometimes, and not realize that they are in service to something quite dark inside themselves. I think this happens all the time in corporate America. You have someone you want to get rid of, and so you give them advice that will end their career, and then they go and do it, and you step back as if you're innocent. These kinds of machinations, these Machiavellian machinations, are things that happen. They're in the shadow of humanity, sometimes not in the shadow, and it's right out front. But these are forces, destructive forces that are real. And the dream is also providing these metaphorical moments for her to have language around that impulse in herself so that she can also confront those impulses when they rise up in her.
I mean, I'm seeing the kind of death-dealing impulses as more kind of an internal phenomenon directed at herself. But Joseph, I take your point and I want to kind of build on it a little bit. She makes the point that it's kind of like a video game.
Mhm.
And it seems like she makes this woman kill herself it's kind of casual. It's like a game. It's like a video game. And I would want the dreamer to think about, where am I casually killing off parts of myself, maybe without thinking about it, just the way that we might kill a lot of time playing a video game.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And which I think really builds on your point, Joseph, is where is this impulse in me, and how am I enacting it without bringing a lot of consciousness to it? Yeah.
And I have to say that people that are teachers in the arts, sometimes they have to give some bad news, which can be dream killing, but it could be the right information. And sometimes out of envy or some other darker impulse, that they can throttle the talent of another person. So I'm imagining, having done a lot of work in music programs when I was an Alexander Technique teacher, it's a very delicate thing for a music teacher to watch a student and to manage their own creative enthusiasm or creative audacity. It only takes a word or two to injure someone's confidence around their creativity, or to just steer them totally away from the entire venture. There was a style of working with artists. My BFA was in acting, and there was kind of a cruel ruthlessness that came out of HB Studios, in the 50s and 60s. That was a kind of death-dealing feedback process that was so cruel and so ferocious. It was really, it was startling, and I went into the program at 18, so I was not prepared for that. But that is a shadow aspect of teaching in the arts. The other reality is about being a teacher in the arts is, somebody who thinks they're going to make a career out of it. Is it a mercy to tell someone you have no talent?
Okay.
Like you're setting yourself up for a life of frustration and misery by pursuing something that you don't seem to evidence skill in. And might this be better as a hobby? And then you can go and work with your strengths to make a living. That is a really awful thing to tell someone. And yet, it can be a mercy if it's accurate and not driven by something like envy. It's life and death in the arts are dancing back and forth with each other all the time, and despair regarding one's art is not uncommon because artists depend upon the approval of the collective, and yet often their creation stands against the collective. What do we do with that tension?
And there's such a difference between, if I'm imagining this into the dreamer, of, perhaps there was a real hope of dedicating herself to the piano and practicing, and, it starts somewhere. And then coming to a place where, I'm not going to be playing at Carnegie Hall, to pull out an old trope. But you still have access to the music. Wasn't it a joy once? Wasn't it special? And that you have that as you go on to some other career, some other pursuit. I once worked for a wonderful person who had been a highly competitive tennis player, but then did not make it into the professional circuit, and embarked on another career altogether that was certainly very rewarding for this person. And she still had tennis. And she went off to play tennis, and she practiced, and she worked with a coach, and she had doubles partners and all kinds of things. It was a joy for her for a lifetime. into her late 50s, and I'm sure beyond, but that's when I knew her. So I think I'm just wanting to kind of pull apart into a couple of different categories the difference between your love for piano and music, versus whether it affords you a career.
Well, and something might have to die. Like that's the medicine in the suicide image.
Absolutely. Life and death are all at play here. The other thing I think the dream is showing, which I think is a cautionary truth that Jung talked a lot about, which is that what's happening inside of us secretly emanates from us, and it influences people around us. It influences perhaps even events and circumstances. So when people are in any kind of a career and they really don't want to be there, a kind of bitterness can build up inside of them. A kind of resentment builds up inside of them. And it is felt by other people, whether or not they can find the exact language for it. And so this feeling that there is a darkness in her that is then influencing other people and maybe even convincing her music students that they should abandon their interest in music because of her own bitterness. It's a very salty medicine to have to take in, but there is something universal about the way that our tensions influence other people. And I think the dream maker is saying that your unhappiness with your career is not only influencing you. Now, the good news, and where this might be medicinal, is that she might not be able to mobilize herself to do something different on her own behalf. But if she were to consider the negative effect she might be having on other people for not doing what she loves, that might move her along because she is capable of loving other people. So it could be a gift to the people around you to do what you love.
And we want to wish this dreamer all the best. And thank you for sending us your dream. Thanks for listening. To submit a dream, suggest an episode topic, or join our mailing list, visit our website, thisjungianlife.com. If you enjoyed this episode, give us 5 stars and a good review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and make sure to click the notification bell to be alerted whenever we upload videos. And keep up with all things TJL by following us on Instagram, Facebook, X, and TikTok.